So, what does justice really mean? It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer has changed a lot over the years. Today, we're going to take a journey through the evolution of the American justice system. We're putting the world of 1940 right next to the laws of today to see just how much our very definition of justice has been totally transformed.
Our story starts right here. Picture this. It's October 1940. This isn't just some random date on a calendar. It's a whole national mood. Europe is completely engulfed in war, and a very, very nervous America is watching from the sidelines, absolutely worried it's next. And that anxiety, it shaped everything, especially how the country thought about crime and justice.
And who better to sum up that feeling than the head of the FBI himself, J. Edgar Hoover? Wow. With this one sentence, he just lays out the nation's biggest fear. See, the enemy isn't some run-of-the-mill criminal anymore. It's a foreign agent, a spy, a saboteur. This really sets the stage for a very specific kind of justice.
So here's how we're going to trace this massive shift. We'll start with that pre-war paranoia and what Hoover was focused on. Then we'll use the crime of kidnapping as a kind of bridge to the present day. And finally, we'll dive into the law's modern focus to see how justice has been completely redefined.
Okay, first up, a nation on edge. You have to understand, back in 1940, the main job of law enforcement wasn't just about catching robbers or burglars. It was about defending the entire country from hidden threats, some real, some maybe imagined, all bubbling up from the war raging overseas.
I mean, just look at this list of threats that Hoover was zeroed in on. You've got espionage, sabotage, communists, and Bundists. Those were American Nazi sympathizers. This wasn't about petty theft. This fifth column, as he called it, was seen as a direct threat to the existence of the state itself. The focus was totally political, ideological, and national.
Which brings us right to our second section, Hoover's priorities. So how did all this national fear actually translate into the day-to-day duties of the FBI? What were agents actually spending their time on?
You know, this right here, the FBI's own pledge for its officers, it captures the mindset of the era perfectly. Check out the language. As a soldier, I shall wage vigorous warfare against the enemies of my country. They weren't just seen as a civil service. The whole thing was framed as a military-style defense of the nation.
And that mindset, it directly shaped what they investigated. The FBI's 1940 list of major crimes, well, it reveals a really clear pattern. They handled things that crossed state lines, like car theft and kidnapping, or crimes that were a direct hit on federal power, like robbing national banks. The top priority was protecting the federal government and interstate commerce.
So for Section 3, we're going to use one specific crime, kidnapping, to connect these two totally different worlds. It was a huge federal concern in 1940, and it's obviously still a very serious crime today. But how we define it, well, that reveals everything about the changing idea of justice.
You see, back in the 1940s, the FBI usually only got involved if a kidnapping victim was physically taken across a state line. That's what made it a federal issue. The crime was defined by its connection to federal jurisdiction, not just by the simple act of abducting someone. And cases like the kidnapping of Charles Ross in 1937 are a perfect example of why this was such a federal priority. You had a high-profile victim, a massive ransom, and a violent, tragic end that sparked a nationwide manhunt by the FBI. This was the kind of huge, dramatic crime that grabbed national headlines and really justified a strong federal response.
Now let's contrast that with how we define kidnapping today. This is under Illinois state law. The difference is pretty stark, right? There's no mention of state lines at all. The entire focus is on the victim's experience, being confined against their will. The harm is to the individual's liberty, plain and simple.
And this shift brings us right into Section 4, the law's modern lens. We're going to move beyond just kidnapping now, to see how this new focus on the individual, on their consent and their right to control their own body, defines modern criminal justice in a way that would have been totally unrecognizable back in 1940. A perfect example of this is Illinois' criminal sexual assault statute, which is actually considered a model for the whole country. It's designed with incredible detail and nuance, all to protect the rights of the individual, not the security of the state.
At the very heart of this modern legal thinking is the idea of consent, and it's carefully defined as a freely given agreement. The law is crystal clear that a lack of resistance because you're scared, that is not consent. This whole concept, which is so central to justice today, is just completely missing from those 1940s FBI documents. And the law goes even further. It establishes the right to withdraw consent at any time. This shows such a deep respect for a person's ongoing autonomy. Justice, in this view, is about protecting an individual's moment-to-moment decisions about their own body.
So this modern approach is really built on several key pillars. The law is gender neutral, which means it protects everyone. It recognizes that psychological threats are a very real form of force. It explicitly protects vulnerable and incapacitated people. And, through what are called rape shield laws, it stops a victim's past from being used against them in court. Every single one of these pillars puts the victim and their individual rights right at the center.
And that brings us to our conclusion in Section 5, Justice Redefined. I mean, when you put it all together, what you're seeing is a fundamental change in the entire philosophy of justice, a massive shift away from protecting the state and toward protecting the person.
The contrast just couldn't be clearer. On one side, you have the 1940s, with a justice system laser-focused on national security and foreign enemies. On the other, you have a modern legal system focused on individual autonomy, consent, and the rights of the victim. It's literally a different world.
Let's just hear Hoover's warning one more time. Back in 1940, the biggest threat to America was seen as this collective political enemy. Today, our laws are built to recognize that the greatest menace can also be the violation of a single person's rights and their autonomy.
So, that leaves us with one last question to think about. We've seen an absolutely incredible evolution over the last 80-plus years. As our world keeps changing, with new technologies, new social challenges, what threats and what new protections will end up defining the justice system of the future?